1930s Queensland saw drought and rising overseas prices amid the fading glories of gold mining. Queenslanders were living on the back of financial depression and war was imminent. Against the odds, the UQ Medical Faculty was established in 1936, sowing the seeds for change across Brisbane, Queensland and Australia. Timing was everything. Sir William McGregor, himself a doctor and former Governor of Queensland, had donated a large sum to establish the UQ Medical School in Queensland. In the 1930s, Queensland's Premier William Forgan Smith held a marked respect for education. Raphael Salento had only recently contributed to a method to prevent outbreaks of leptospiral disease among cane cutters, and the enigmatic and well-regarded Ernest Goddard, Professor of Biology at UQ, emphasised his concerns about tropical health across the hotspots of the state and convinced the Premier of the importance of a Queensland-centred medical profession. Goddard, along with E.S. Myers, James Dewig and E.S. Jackson, knew that a medical school would allow Queensland to produce its own doctors, and their legacy continues across UQ campuses, with buildings bearing their names as tribute to their enduring ties to the university. At the announcement of the establishment of the James and Amelia Mayne Medical School, known as the Mayne Medical School, the medical profession was jubilant. The long fight was at last over. No longer was medicine limited to those who could afford to study in Sydney or Melbourne. Queenslanders of academic ability now had access to a university in their own state to study medicine. This was also the beginning of the medical family tree at the University of Queensland.
I married an ADSET, and on the ADSET side, Benjamin Neal was one of the original graduates of the University of Queensland Medical School. He had two sons who both were graduates, Geoffrey and Don. Donald had a son and a daughter who both were graduates of the University of Queensland Medical School, and Mark, one of the children of Don, married Amy, who was also a graduate of the University of Queensland. On the other side, my sister, Leisha, married Scott McMinimum, who was the son of Patrick Bernard McMinimum, who in turn had a daughter, Robin, who married John Bradfield, both of whom were graduates of the medical school. And Scott subsequently had a son, Drew, who was a graduate of the University of Queensland.
The school was tasked with the challenge of training medical graduates immediately capable of surgery, anaesthetics and delivering babies, as well as fractures and the occasional chest and brain operation. For their multitude of skills, they were poorly remunerated, and eventually the UQ Medical Society would take the Queensland Government to court over slave labour as a result of how poorly first-year doctors were paid. Since 1939, the University of Queensland Medical School has occupied a commanding position in Hurston, Brisbane. Since its opening, all medical students have passed beneath the decorative elliptical arch between the main entrance and the rear corridor.
Hippocrates is the founder of medicine, or of Western medicine as we understand the profession and the discipline of healing in the 21st century. And he did two things. He firstly brought medicine out of the world of the supernatural and changed it into a science. And secondly, he embarked medicine with a higher ethical code that we know today as the Hippocratic Oath, which empowers and enmeshes and in fact guides all practices of healthcare today.
The UQ Medicine family tree continued to grow with the connections building from generation to generation. Charles Rowe and Esther Gilmore Wilson are graduates of the class of 1942 and are the forebears of another large medical family.
When I wanted to be a doctor, Dad tried quite hard to persuade me out of it because of the length of the course, which was 6 years in those days, just the one course. And Mum supported me a bit, you know, and she said within medicine there's a lot of different directions you can go. If you like people, you can do general practitioner. If you like small little hand work, you can be an eye surgeon. If you like big heavy stuff, you can be an orthopaedic surgeon, etc., etc. So, and if you don't like people at all, you can be a pathologist, she said.
In 1941, Hurston heard of the first medical student to be killed in action. Henry Douglas had been flying with the RAAF. Well over 100 students and graduates were in service at the peak of the war and continue to serve in our Defence Forces today.
The reason, of course, for graduating us in March was that the people who graduated in 1941 were needed. There was an enormous expansion of the Army and the Navy and the Air Force, and they took them after they'd been in hospital about 3 months. We reported down to the casualty, and Sister Taylor was the one who ran the casualty. The patients will come through here, through the door here, and when you need the next patient, ring this bell. And she leant over and went, bang. And we saw 70 patients. Raw as you could possibly be, we were chucked in right at the deep end.
The school, through UQMS, honours our fallen alumni with a moving Anzac Day service each year. The medical school forged ahead, despite the fall of Singapore in 1942 and wartime shortages, with 24 students passing scheduled exams. Ever resourceful, the graduates passed the only 3 gowns available from one to the other during the ceremony. As was intended by the reformers, who could see the potential in training Queensland doctors, the early UQ Medical School graduates made important contributions to their fields and their state. Professor Ralph Doherty discovered the virus for infectious polyarthritis, or Ross River fever, named after the river where it was first identified in Townsville. He was also cousin to UQ alumnus Professor Peter Doherty AC, 1996 Nobel laureate and Australian of the Year in 1997. The medical school also provided an opportunity for new immigrants arriving in the state post-World War II to study medicine.
And we came here as migrants in 1948. I had always had the ambition to become a doctor. But because of wartime events, my education had been interrupted. And when we came here, I still wanted to be a doctor. I was able to obtain an interview with the Dean of the medical school, who at the time was Professor Myers.
There's 3 generations of University of Queensland graduates in my family now. My late father, John Yelland, left school in 1945 and then joined the post-war class of 1946 at the University of Queensland, graduated in 1951. So he was 30 years older than me. And that was a very significant year, and I sometimes reflect on what an interesting sort of experience he would have had as a schoolboy from the boarding school in North Queensland, joining a university class with men who were older, who'd returned from the war, who had had far more experiences than he had.
Over time, the UQ Medical School grew from its roots as a training ground for Queenslanders, attracting staff and graduates who became renowned for their medical contributions to Queensland, Australia and the world. We would like to acknowledge past medical students and graduates who have paid the ultimate price in their service to our country.